One. And we welcome back Dr. Charles Kos to the show. How are you, mate?
Very well, thank you, Triffin. It's good to be here.
Mate, I know we only just had you on, but we started a conversation and we didn't we just started a conversation. And I listened back to your show. I've been flicking through your book, Confessions of the Gods, okay, which we're going to have a look at. Maybe we'll see whether we get to that tonight. We've only got about 400 subjects to cover. So what I did want to start, what I wanted to explore with you was technology. So you spent a long time studying pyramids, you spent a long time studying the stone circles, Stonehenge, all these sorts of things. And I think somewhere along the way, and I'd be curious to hear your perspective as to when that happened for you. Like it's, oh yeah, pretty stones, pretty pyramids, oh wow, wow, wow. But then at some point, well, my brain goes to logistics, right? Because that's my profession. Okay. So I go into how do they move it? What do they move it? And then I thought to myself, well, hang on a minute. In order to get to a logistical solution, there is a level of technology that needs to be baseline that I would say hunter gatherers in loincloths with big bats probably weren't at, right? I mean, we're talking about geology, we're talking about astronomy, we're talking about astrology, we're talking about mathematics, we're talking about trigonometry, we're talking, what I mean? There's all these things. Like you don't just make a perfect circle, do you, Charles?
Well, that's right.
Mm. So, I mean, when we talk about, when I think we our last conversation we were talking, about the advanced civilization. I mean, let's take Stonehenge because I know you're right up on that and you're studying that. That's your current field of study. At the baseline, we're looking geology, astronomy, astrology, mathematics, trigonometry at the baseline in order to build that site. It's not by accident, is it? Well, I mean, what's your thoughts on this stuff?
Well, it contains a lot. When we
Mm,
look at Stonehenge, when we look at pyramids, we're looking at what seems to be the same religion, the same people,
yes.
a worldwide people. They went
Mm,
everywhere.
yep.
It's recorded in Genesis, all the world was one language.
Mm.
That was originally their book. They took it around the world, the Bible, an earlier version that we don't have.
Yeah. Well, look, I had this conversation with someone the other day. I think the reason the Bible has so much power is that it is almost the story, right? It's pretty close. It's not the story, but there's that many elements of truth within that core story, the cataclysm, the ark, all these different things, Nephilim, we can go into these sorts of things. A lot of that is true in a variation, except it was bastardized for control, basically. Uh, but the original, it could have been the story, and I think it is the story. So, I mean, what do you is Stonehenge another one of those sites where things are encoded within the site, right? So, yes, it aligns to solstice. Yes, it does this. Yes, it does that. But there's encoded stuff in there as well. What's some of the things we see there that you've had a look at?
Very much so, Triffin. It encodes essentially the imperial system. Now, the imperial system of measures, it was worldwide. I find it in every ancient site,
Mm,
and you can find it especially when you use two obscure imperial units, the rods and the chains.
mm,
You see those at the pyramids very prolifically, the early mastabas, the later mastabas in Egypt, also at Stonehenge. And when you start using this, you start to see, oh, it's honoring the size of the Earth. It's honoring the speed of the Earth. It's honoring the rotation of the Earth,
mm,
honoring the speed of the Earth through space. These were Earth-centric people. And it
mm,
led me to see that these are the same as the pyramid builders. In other words, essentially, they believed that the earth was God, so they had to be reincarnation worshippers. In other
mm.
words,
Okay.
it all they wanted to come back to Earth. Earth was their God, and Earth was what they worshipped. And I found, and others have found as well, that this is the whole basis of the pyramid religion, mapping the size of the Earth into these pyramids.
Okay. But we just said you just said a whole heap of words that let's unpack for a minute. So we're talking about the size of the planet, the speed of the planet, how big it is, how wide it is. You don't just come to a guess with that stuff, Charles. Right? There has to be some sort of understanding of measurement. You know, as you say, the rods and the chains, cool. That is their unit of measurement. So then that means they had mathematics. They had to have had mathematics. They've had to have, and in order for these echoes to go around the planet, they've been around the planet.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I sort of wanted to talk to you about the technology, it's like, yeah, I mean, if you just even think the math that goes into that, or into Stonehenge. Let's stay with Stonehenge. Just the math that goes into that, making sure that it catches the solstice sun every time, and it lights up everything else. The math to put in a circle on the ground measurements of a sphere. Yeah, it's interesting that not a lot of people talk about this. I mean, and if I think about logistics, the type of stone and how do you actually move that? You can't just take every stone because every stone is different. How did they know that? It's like someone went and knocked on it with a stick. Yeah, that one's good, mate. Send it. There's got to be the base level of understanding in order to put even, I don't like to use the word, but primitive stone circles together. I don't think a lot of people know that. I mean, and then you've got the stars. So not only does it reflect what it's standing on, a lot of these things reflect above them as well, as above, so below. It's impressive.
That's quite true. And in fact, one of the things I found was they incorporate, and by using the imperial system, these things honor all the ancient sciences whose knowledge was wrapped up into the imperial system. So I'm talking things like alchemy, and I've got a question.
Mm.
What's the origin of alchemy? What's the first alchemy book? We don't have it.
It's Egyptian, isn't it? Chemistry, alchemy, isn't it? Didn't they? Isn't that originally? Is alchemy another one of those ones where it's like we think it originated here, but no one really knows? Is that what we're talking about?
Exactly. It seems to have originated everywhere. The word chem, but it's also an English word as well. Gum.
Mm.
Playing with gum, different types of sticky substance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we don't have an origin for alchemy. We don't have an origin for the alchemy, what I would call the alchemy alphabet. All these strange sigil-like symbols.
Yes, the
There's no
33.
origin to them.
Yes. You're talking about the 33 symbols that echo around the planet. Is that the ones you're talking about?
Yeah,
Or you're
yeah.
talking about the alchemical symbols themselves?
Well, the alchemical symbols, I've found that it's similar to several East European alphabets, such as Glagolithic or Old Croatian.
Mm.
And
It does look very Cyrillic, doesn't it? I can see where you draw that together, that conclusion. Yeah.
indeed, so I'm thinking this is actually a megalithic science, and it's come down to us in a tiny bit.
Mm.
Only a tiny bit has survived, just like a tiny bit of the Bible has survived and come down to us in its current form.
Mm. I mean, alchemy is one of those ones that didn't basically survive the industrial revolution, did it? The pharmaceutical and industrial revolution. Alchemy was very ostracized during that time. And because, I mean, it's turning lead into gold. That's the common alchemy, isn't it? Right? Taking something and turning it into gold. That's, I know alchemy is much deeper than that, and we can open that rabbit hole if you like. However, that's the common, you can't turn lead into gold sort of thing. And, that means they're all crackpots. But that's where chemistry is developed from alchemy. Like, that's an extension of alchemy. Playing with the elements. These are the things we're talking about, isn't it?
Well, exactly. the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment, it wasn't just a form of woke. It's like, oh, we're in the light now. It was also a revolution against the old knowledge. And in a revolution, old things get destroyed. And a lot of the Enlightenment was about destroying the old history,
Hmm.
wiped out the old history. We have history
Yes.
in Britain going back thousands of years, in Ireland especially. It seems to, in the Chronicles. The way I see it, the history goes back all the way to Newgrange, but that is ignored and treated now as mythology ever since the Enlightenment.
Right. And so when we took, because the Enlightenment was it's been a while since I've talked about the Enlightenment, but it's embracing, it was in leaving the Bible behind, wasn't it? It was more embracing science and those sorts of things. So therefore, the original stories that came down through tradition were all lumped in with the Bible and everything. We're now enlightened and we can see the way in a way. Like I know that's a bit of a proceed version.
It was a bit of both. So I've got a reprint, a 1970s reprint of the first edition Britannica. And when I read articles about, say, astronomy and all this, or the world or geology, what they mention Noah and things like this. So they did mix a bit of Bible with their new science ideas
Mm.
in a way, in order not to totally alienate everyone, and to show that, okay, there's some continuity, there's something to our new ideas. Well, let's put a
Mm.
bit of Bible in there.
It was also was it during the Enlightenment or after it? Is that catastrophism? It was looked down upon because that's what the Bible says, right? Armageddon, the giant flood, and that is part of the reason that they, even to this day, ignore the mega flood theories, right? Because that's how deep the indoctrination from that time goes. Is that's I'm along those same lines, aren't I?
Yeah, yes, it's quite right. The Bible is essentially catastrophism. God makes a decision to flood the planet. That's a catastrophe. It's based on the Bible, isn't it?
Mm,
So we have to get, if we want to be scientific and worship the technology, we have to get away from the Bible. So we have to lurch to the opposite polarity. We have to say, okay, everything's gradual.
everything's gradual, yeah, which is not. It's just not true. Like it's just not true. And the evidence for the cataclysm. Oh, here's a question. A little bit of a left field question, but I'm curious. Do you just so I just put myself out, right? So as far as on the sides of what I'm about to say, I'm a D all of above kind of guy, right? But there seems to be two distinct sides with massive solar flares or extraterrestrial impact causing the last cataclysm. I know you've looked into it and I know you've thought about it. Where do you lie?
I feel like it's more an impact
Mm,
due to, it could also be part solar as well. The Ice Age, the Milankovitch cycles, they didn't convince a lot of people, and they still don't convince a lot of people for those cycles. There may be an extraterrestrial impact clockwork also at work that they're just not looking at, because again, that's catastrophism, so it doesn't fit that well into, say, post 1950s science.
mhm. That's an interesting answer. See, my thought was, so let's play it out, right? Massive ice shelf, North America, multiple bombardment impact into that ice shelf. That causes isostatic depression, which basically lifts the American plate. And, that I think Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean. There's a discussion we could have. However, that plate is weighed down with the ice. That ice gets released. The plate goes like that. In between those two plates is the Azores Plateau, which I think personally, the research that I've looked at, that's where Atlantis was. However, that sort of disruption in the magnetic in the tectonic plates of the planet, not to mention the massive impact and then the resulting espira that goes up back into the atmosphere, I think would disrupt the magnetic field, which would then open us to solar flares. You know what I mean? Like I think it could be a D. We don't understand because we've never experienced it. We wouldn't be having the conversation if we had, probably. However, we don't know what happens when massive things impact. What does that do? Does that reverberate through the earth, upsetting the core? stopping the core, which then stops the magnetic field, which then opens us up to all the solar radiation that we don't get every day due to the magnetic field. And then providing that evidence that we do see for some sort of solar flare activity. You know, it could be D or the above. I think the last cataclysm was that catastrophic that we struggle to even wrap our minds around it, even those of us that study it.
That's quite right. And there were quite a few catastrophes as well, as pointed out by, I think his name was Sonchis, according to Plutarch, the priest who spoke to Solon in Egypt. And he said there were many catastrophes, not just one deluge. You Greeks are only talking about one deluge. There were many.
Mm. Well, I mean, we go back to the Pharaoh's list and the Sumerians' kings list, where they accept like a third of the list because they have regular human lifetimes. Then the rest of the list, they all live for 1,000 years, or not a couple of hundred, 400, 300. And the general understanding is, oh, they're just joking about the rest of that list. They're just joking about it. It was just a joke. Well, you know, because that's what you do. But I think it was Randall Carlson that said, I've got a graph somewhere. I'm sure you're like me. You've got 4,000 folders of research. I've got a graph somewhere that actually measures the cataclysms, the minor and the major extinction level events for the last 250,000 years. And it's like 25 or 30. I think it's even more than that. Because I think some cataclysms are localized as well. They're not all global, but they could be a localized impact or a localized volcano or a localized catastrophe. But you are right. The old Egyptian said many catastrophes. I mean, so question then, your perspective, right? No, don't have to give me any proof or anything. How old do you think we are, humans?
Oh, millions of years old.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is we actually can't find the common ancestor.
No, no, we can't. No, we don't. Well, this is the part of the research that I'm doing at the moment for another set of shows with Loomis, is we don't share a single bone with a primate.
Exactly so. These primates are simply possibly other monkeys a million years ago,
Mm,
but they're still not human.
mm. So you do think millions?
Exactly. And this skews the research because whenever we find primate tools or whatever, we say, oh, this is all that humans were capable of. And if they ever find anything else more advanced, if they ever find rusty steel under the ground, bits of ceramic in the same layer, that will never, ever, ever be published.
Mm. That is a problem.
A
That is
massive
a
problem.
problem. Yeah. Well, it's like the Clovis site. Have you heard about what they're doing at the Clovis? So Clovis culture was the oldest American culture that existed, and one of the guys that was digging there dug deeper. And guess what? There's more stuff. The deeper you dig, there's more stuff. The people have been going to that site for they're not sure how long. I think the numbers are out past 30,000 years, and everyone went, "Oh no, that's not true." Well, maybe it is. You know, as we say at UTC, Charles, a good spot's a good spot, mate. You know what I mean? It's you know, so the Clovis spot site was obviously a good spot, and that you know people have been attending that site for 30,000 plus years. But again, they stopped digging when they got to 30,000, right? So it's like, okay, what if they kept digging? What are we going to find?
Exactly. I think there's another problem as well. Geology might be interfering with paleontology because we have a very firm ice age theory these days.
Mm-hmm.
We say that these ice sheets were here, therefore Europe had to be uninhabited, therefore everyone there had to be primitive, therefore we're only allowed to find primitive things and publish those things in journals.
Mm.
Um, but I've seen so much evidence that and this was the case early on. They weren't sure whether the striations on rocks were from the flood,
Mm.
from an ice age. I think we've got something wrong with the dating and these ice ages may not have been as we think they were at the times we think they were.
Mm.
Just
Look,
feel it.
look, the timeline is interesting, right? I think the timeline is definitely skewed. I think it is actually, we come back to catastrophism. I wonder, what does catastrophe do to carbon dating? Does it accelerate it? I imagine if a massive rock compressed a whole heap of other rock, that rock's then more pressed together. And as far as I understand carbon dating, the tighter the pack, the older it is. But if it got hit by a rock, did that tighten the pack? You know, you see, you feel me what I'm saying here? It's like, what does catastrophe do to our dating mechanisms, and how accurate are they? And I think it's definitely a part of the stuff that we do with the sacred we did with the sacred site documentary is it's almost talking about, is there a, with some of this stuff, Charles, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. Feels like there's a conspiracy theory to keep this knowledge at bay. What do you think about that?
Oh, well, people have a worship of authority. It's huge. It was proved in the Milgram experiment in the 50s, which shocked America when they found out that ordinary average people are happy to take people up to lethal electrocution
Oh, that's the yes.
level. You know,
Give them a little bit of power, yeah, and they just keep winding that dial up, yeah.
and they found out that these people will follow these death orders if it's in a clinical lab situation given by people in white coats, but they're less likely to do so if it's in an abandoned factory somewhere and they start to think, well, this isn't quite right. But
Mm,
if it's authority, yeah, they'll pull the trigger. Yeah,
yeah,
it's worship. They worship the authority, and so they put the worship first, and then they put their own fact finding second, if they have any fact finding at all, because people have
yeah.
different abilities.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, you are correct about that. That's interesting. Do you think it's just authority worship, or do you think there's a look? I do think some of it comes down to ignorance. Some stuff, some people's research is just thrown away when they die. I think we spoke about that last time. However, if one of the reasons I think there's a an effort to keep the truth from coming out totally is that as humans, if we knew that there was a planetary religion, science that existed for thousands of years that echoed across every continent, every country, every color, creed of person, if we knew that, that could potentially bring us together. And that doesn't make much money. You know, you know what I mean? Like, then that authority, if we as humans understood who we truly were, then that stuff wouldn't matter. And there is a, we've witnessed it the last couple of years, mate. There is an agenda. There is an agenda.
Yeah, I think there is for whatever reasons there's lots of reasons. The ones you've mentioned, also tall poppy syndrome, especially in the academic world, people literally aren't allowed to say anything too different
Mm,
simply because they'll be torn down for whatever human psychological evolutionary reasons.
mm,
As animals sometimes do to each other, it's been witnessed in the animal world. They don't let uh, a competitor be too strong. Sometimes others will gang up on them.
mm.
There's
Yeah,
a
you
lot at
can't, you
play.
can't, you can't deviate from the herd, mate, or you get killed. I'd be curious to ask. I mean, obviously, we've got your book here, Confessions of the Gods, that we're going to get to. Did you have any pushback? I mean, obviously, coming from your doctorate about Robin Hood, fully entrenched in academia, then you release Confessions of the Gods, Nuclear War of the Anunnaki versus the Nephilim. Love the title, by the way. Like that, there's a whole heap of triggering words in there for me. Well, that's the reason it's sitting here. However, did you get any pushback, or you didn't care by that stage? You'd checked out.
Yeah, I had checked out by that stage. I didn't particularly care. And this book, it was also an experiment. I wanted to see if I was able to write something which would get a lot of purchases, and actually it did. People are absolutely fascinated about this topic.
Mm,
I wanted to follow in the tradition of von Daniken, who I think is a very clever man, and he makes a lot of pertinent points that no one is able to explain, hence they dismiss him because it sort of overloads their minds.
Yeah, Chariots of
Read
Fire is
all
a
of the
very
books.
interesting thing. Yeah, Chariots of Fire is very
Incredible.
interesting. Yeah.
Just incredible. Yeah, a tiny bit. Some people thought I was a bit weird with this,
Mm.
but it didn't really change anything. I wasn't having an academic career anyway. I wasn't too interested in that. So, uh,
That ship had already
it's not like
sailed, mate. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, and I'd been reading stuff in the Mahabharata, the ancient Indian texts, which convinced me that India must have been spared the deluges.
Well, if you think about it, so this is the sanctum, mate. So just give me a sec. Here's a little globe that I prepared earlier, right? So if you think about it, so there's Russia, there's Africa. So the impact happened on this side. Okay. Yes, the sea level rose on a global scale because of the amount of water that was dumped into the ocean, if we go with the current narrative. But if you look at it, Africa, they're basically that other entire side of the globe may not have been habitable, but it wouldn't have been destroyed like the Americas. And you would have to think that, I mean, it comes back to technology. It comes back to technology. How do you do? You want to focus in on the Indians for a second and the Mahabharata. The Indian megalithic palaces that are built out of one piece of stone are unbelievable. And that's not something that's spoken about. I know Praveen Mohan. He does a lot of good work on that. However, he was the first guy to really show everybody what is actually truly in India. And it's hard not to say that those temples look laser cut out of the stone. Like, how else do we're doing that with copper chisels, are we, mate? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, a lot of those rocks, I believe, could have been recycled. I think that possibly about the Stonehenge rocks, the Great Pyramid rocks. I think they might have been cut up from earlier, bigger rocks, and maybe these rocks too from higher technology rocks, simply left on site. Here's all these huge, massive rocks left on site. Some of them have excellent laser cuts. Let's use this to build a temple so we don't need to quarry. Let's simply recycle.
Mm.
And then I think, is this the prevalent way ancient monuments were built? I think I might have mentioned Persepolis in the last episode. I can't remember.
Oh, expand for us. Expand.
Built on a
Talk to us.
huge Baalbek-like platform in Iran.
Oh, that's right. Yes, yes, yes. The
They
Baalbek in
put the
Iran.
capital there, Persepolis. It wasn't on the way to anywhere. It was in the middle of nowhere, even back then for the Persians.
Mm.
And archaeologists say, why did they do this? It must have been because they were venerating it was some ancient site of kingship.
Yeah, they knew. They already knew. Well, Baalbek's the same. The Romans marched into the desert to build Baalbek. There's nothing there. There was no reason to go there. And they built a massive temple to Dionysus on the top of Baalbek. And I think the city of Tyre, which is south of Baalbek, you talk about an untouched megalithic city that no one talks about. Tyre is one. I saw some photos of Tyre. There's megaliths everywhere, right? And the thing is, I showed, I thought I'd bring the Mason's mug out for you tonight. I showed you earlier. But in the Masonic documents that I have, it tells the story about the Temple of Solomon and the fact that the first lodge was built during the temple, supposedly. And but the Masons that came to build the Temple of Solomon were initiates of the Dionysian mysteries, but they came from Tyre. And if you look up Tyre now, which is near Lebanon, there's megaliths everywhere, and no one talks about it. Right? It's a megalithic city that hasn't made it into the zeitgeist yet. But that apparently is where the architects came from to build the Temple of Solomon.
Very good point, actually, especially when we consider the Masonic fascination with the two pillars, right?
Mm-hmm.
The two
Mm-hmm.
pillars in front of every lodge. Every lodge looks like a reconstruction of the Temple of Solomon to prove they're the Solomon builders, right?
Yep.
These two pillars, it's almost like, say, twin pillars at Stonehenge. It's just two pillars, and it's as if the emphasis is on that.
Hmm.
as much as the building. So the pillars could be there by themselves, as if it was a megalithic thing like Stonehenge.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And the pillars are the left and the right, mate. They're the dark and the light. They are the two sides of self. They are the, and in between the two pillars is the human, and we are God. I think, like so many things that lost their way, I think the Masons lost their way as well. I think that they originally were keepers of knowledge that I don't think we even truly comprehend. I think they were the keepers of the stone builders. I think they were originally with absolute power. With power corrupts when you put it in the hands of a human, and I think they lost their way because the Masonic teachings are quite are really amazing if you look at them. However, again, they've been used to create power. Power corrupts. I don't know whether that was the original intention because they were keepers of the knowledge, keepers of the builders, the builder culture.
Yes, I've no doubt that the Masons. Have you heard of British Israelism?
A little bit. Expand for us.
It's a very strong belief in the 19th century that the Britons and the English are based on the tribes of Israel in their ancestry. In other words, we're talking about who else but megalith builders, because people who came across the ocean and who were able to build.
Mm.
When I look at masonry, some people say, is it based on, say, the Hebrew ideas? Not really. To me,
No.
it comes from Western Europe. It might be based on the religion of these
Mm.
British Israelites. You could call them Phoenicians. You could call them, we don't know.
Well, the thing about it is, Charles, is that if you start looking into Masonic history, Masonic symbolism history, if you go back and go back and go back, as each religion rose, the Masons took the iconography of that religion and used it in its teachings, and then it fell away, and then it rose again, and then they used it again, right? So the Masonic symbolism when the Greeks was of the gods, the multiple gods and all that sort of stuff. It's the messenger. Can't remember. I know it's the dove now. It's the dove now in Masonics. But if you go back, that symbol has changed 3 or 4 times. And what it does is it changes with whatever religion is prevalent at the time. Whichever religion has power, the Masons adapt their symbolism or their iconography to that religion in order to ingratiate themselves, I would imagine, with the power that comes with that religion of the time, so they stay relevant. But they have changed over time. It's not all one. And that was one of the interesting rabbit holes I fell down with the Masonic stuff because it's not all one. It's they changed their iconography and their symbolism. The base stays the same. Was it is it Jakin and what's the other I can't remember. The two pillars, Jakin and Boab. I'm
Yeah,
messing that up. Is that
Boaz, I
right?
think.
Yeah, Boaz. Boaz, that's it.
Yeah,
Jakin and
Yakim and
Boaz.
Boaz. Yeah.
Yeah. And that stays the same. The as you say, their lodges stay the same. What goes on in the lodge stays the same, but their outside perception, they adapt the iconography and the symbolism of the prevailing power structure that they're involved in, therefore ingratiating themselves within that. And that speaks to me that they've been here the whole time. It's like, it's just another religion. Oh, well, these guys are in power now. We'll change the Greek god to a dove, and whichever that god used to mean this, now it means that. Well, we'll change that, and then that means the knowledge is still continued to be passed down using the different symbolism of the different cultures that exist in it.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. It's fascinating stuff. How do we get onto Masons? Uh, I tell you what, I'm very interested in some of the Masonic books you've got. Some of your sneaky little collection. You sell most of them, don't you? But sometimes you just squirrel a couple away.
I've got about four or five now. I found another one today from the 50s, New South Wales. There seems to be two of them, you know. There's either a little blue book on the first, second, third degrees and the knowledge given to them, which is with each degree, which is basically Solomon did this and that when he built and
But
this is
is
how they
that and
built it.
those little blue books? They've got gaps in them. Hey, where there's words missing. Is that the ones?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So they're hard to read because even in their own book, they don't want to spill all the
Yeah,
vat.
without the key, you can't read it. Yeah, that's the thing.
I see. Well, I was also thinking is that they've actually omitted many vowels the way sometimes the 19th century books omit the vowels for God. So they just write
Mm,
GD, G
mm,
hyphen D.
mm.
So it's almost like Hebrew or ancient Egyptian. They're skipping the vowels, you know.
Yeah, there is that. There is that. But what I do know, but I haven't got a copy of it yet because I've got those little blue books as well. There's a key that goes with it that you can't get, right? You have to be initiated correctly to even get the key to be able to read the book. Like those numbers and the dot 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 and this as you go through the book. As you say, it's difficult to read because there's words missing, but that there is a key that goes with that little blue book. Or you're taught the words that go with it because that's the idea is you're supposed to memorize that. You're supposed to be able to put that book down and recite whatever chapter off the top of your head. That's how you move up in your degree. One of the things you have to do to move up in your degrees.
It's like a link to the Druids. Memorize everything.
Yeah, well, this is what I'm talking about. Okay, so the Druids, wizardry, right? Oh, here you go. Here we go. See, we haven't even gone anywhere we wanted to tonight, but it's been excellent anyway. We'll just keep going. Magic. We're talking about druids. We're talking about moving giant stones. We're talking about this, that, and the other. Where do you stand on magic with a K? I suppose is what we'll say.
Are we talking Aleister Crowley here?
Not necessarily. Maybe we're talking older than that. What? Well, actually, this comes from one of the boys, by the way, who listened to the show. Where did you, with your research into Robin Hood, did you brush against Arthur and Camelot and those sorts of stories? Did you look at the Arthurian stuff or not really? You were zero focused.
Oh no, I've read all about King Arthur. Um, my view, and this was a view of some ancient paper, sorry, some 20th century authors as well, was that a lot of that is Bronze Age. A lot of that is
Mm-hmm.
Bronze Age Atlantic culture. So we're talking about a country that owned Britain, but they also owned parts of Spain and France and maybe Norway as well. And they controlled
So
the
a
sea.
seafaring culture. This is another seafaring culture. Yeah.
Exactly, a seafaring culture. And that helps to explain, oh, this international or interregnal quest that they did. They sent their knights all over the world.
Mm.
How if they're not a seafaring power with a big navy?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, then, when I say magic, I'm talking about Merlin.
So Merlin's an interesting one. Was he a druid? The answer is maybe yes, maybe no. He is actually described as a prophet in the
Okay.
Latin. So his name is Marvin in the Welsh, Merlin in Latin. He's described as a prophet. Um, there seems to be two Merlins. There's a shaggy guy living in the forest who says keep away. And then there's
Mm-hmm.
another guy who is close to the king and his advisor with a druid-like status.
Mm-hmm.
So there do seem to be at least two of them, and they've merged. Because I find it hard to reconcile the official one with this other one.
So, which is the official one, the Druid version, or what? Which is the official one?
I'm not quite sure. The real one you mean? I'm not quite sure, but I see a sort of a priest
Well,
very close to the king, advising the king. So who is he? What culture are we
mm,
talking
mm,
about? We're talking
mm.
about a priest king culture, and we suspect there was a priest king culture back in the Bronze Age. And this doesn't fit so well
Okay.
into the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages or the Roman times. Maybe slightly the Roman times.
Well, I mean, the cardinal advising the king's hand, the king's advisor. That's not an uncommon thing across most cultures, is it though? Like, there's the. I suppose we didn't. We okay. Let me ask you. Let me ask it a different way. Do you think that some point in the past we were able to harness the elements, the most important of them being the ether, because that's the thing that joins everything else together? Do you think that humans at one point had a deeper understanding of that?
Yes, well, they definitely saw everything as unified. The word ether itself, it's just another form of the word water with the root, with the D in the middle.
Mm.
Um, my research took me along a sort of trajectory where I saw that learning one aspect helped you learn all of it through the imperial system, which unified it all. Music, we're talking alchemy, we're talking. And here's the thing, magic wasn't one of the surviving liberal arts or sciences in the Middle Ages. I think these seven liberal arts, or there were three sciences and four arts, or four sciences and three arts. These come down from megalithic times in a very slight way into the Middle Ages and then thrown away with the Enlightenment. Learning
Mm.
music as well, because why learn the music? Because the music created the world. It's physics for them, for the megalithic builders.
Well,
And
it's
this was
all.
all
I
a
mean,
unified system. Learning one helped you learn the lot. All
what?
through the imperial system is what I'm working out. Uh,
So
Magic.
is that similar to Tesla saying if we understood the meaning of 3, 6, and 9, we'd understand everything? Because I mean, everything is just energy and vibration, is it not? And this is, as you say, learning
Yes.
music.
I suppose, yeah, and we're also talking, by the way, and this fits the Tesla quotes, because Tesla was like, "Oh, you understand this number, you'll understand the world." That's Pythagoreanism, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. I think the Pythagoreanism is another. I think Pythagoras, Pitta, is another way of saying Buddha.
Mm.
It's an old religion. And this Pythagoreanism, it wasn't come up with by Pythagoras. I think he named himself after the system, if he was even called
He
that.
found it. Yeah, he found it. They found it. I think because I mean, you are you aware of the Sumerian tablet that rewrites trigonometry, and it's actually much simpler to do trigonometry using the Sumerian way than it is the Greek way. And the tablet's like I did a podcast on it years ago, but it's the tablet's like 1,200 years older than when Pythagoras gave us trigonometry supposedly. But I honestly think with the Greeks, and look, my name is Triffin. I do have Greek heritage, so I'm sort of dobbing myself in here a little bit. However, I think they stole a lot of it, Charles, or they found it. You know what I mean? I think when they had that massive fleet and they conquered Troy in particular, I think Troy might have been hiding a lot of secrets. By all accounts, Troy was a megalithic city, and I think they found it or they rediscovered it, something along those lines.
100%. Because if you look at, I'd say most of well, I'm not sure exactly, but many of the Greek mathematicians, etc., they were working at the Library of Alexandria, which was a sort of university. Here's a
Yes.
fun rabbit hole for you. Solon was working at Alexandria. Steam engine. Was it Solon? Was someone else? Whoever came up with the steam engine, he read that in a book.
Yeah.
We want to know how to move the blocks.
Yeah. And this is what I'm saying. This is we're dealing with echoes. The Library of Alexandria is one. The other one that makes me shed a tear is what the conquistadors did to the South Americans, and basically that they talk about in their books like piles, massive big piles of writings and papyrus, and like what was in that. like any bit of writing, because the Spanish, God is great. He loves you, but he wants your money. Uh, he they burned it all, man. Like they just burned it all. It's you can only just imagine what was in those. Because I mean, the South American pyramids, whilst very similar, are built, I think, with a different understanding of that technology to the Egyptian pyramids and other pyramids. Like you know, why did they have mercury, pools of mercury at the bottom of the South American pyramids? Like that's an interesting question. But yeah, they just burned so much, and it's I wonder. Yeah. What would you pay to get into the Vatican, Charles? What would you?
You know what, I tell you what, the Vatican must be. I've really looked into the history of the Vatican as well. And the funny thing, yeah, here's a funny thing about the Vatican. Rome used to have lots of they say there were two pyramids, right? They look like the Ethiopian pyramids, but there were actually more of them. I've seen an old map of Rome from I think the 1600s, and there are pyramids all around the outside. I don't know how many, maybe, but at least more than two
Hmm,
outside the city wall. Where the Vatican is built, that was an old cemetery. It had some of these pyramids. Were they
really?
Etruscan pyramids? Who knows? They built Vatican is on a cemetery, an ancient, huge cemetery, which was outside the city walls. So there's stuff there that goes back a long way, you
Yeah,
know.
because the catacombs under the Vatican as well. I mean, we go back to what we spoke about. If there was pyramids there, maybe there's a platform that's underneath the chapel. Like that. The reason they built there is because that's where they had to build, right? It's like it's there, over the evidence of this culture.
100%, 100%. And Rome has been there for a very long time. The word I've looked into the word itself is Rama,
Mm.
an Aryan god. So this was a religious place. It
And
was
the,
a
what?
Baalbek-like place.
Yeah, and it was also the story of Roma. Isn't that's the brothers of Troy? Isn't that the brothers of Troy escaped and they founded Rome? I think that's the one of the stories anyway. They took the sword of Troy, which was the seat of power. Two brothers took it to Rome, or took it to Italy, and founded Rome.
Exactly. And this story actually helps me to date the two surviving pyramids that are in Rome, because there's a medieval legend that these pyramids contained the bodies of Romulus and Remus.
Mm,
And why would that be if the pyramids were also supposedly built by the classical Romans? I don't believe they were built by the classical Romans. I think they were simply renovated by the classical Romans. So there's a lot there that goes back. And there's something else. You mentioned, I think, platform or something.
mm,
Piranesi. I don't know if you've seen an old video I made. Piranesi made many diagrams of Rome as it was in the 1600s. Under the
mm.
theatre of Marcellus, it's essentially a huge megalithic platform of interlocking blocks.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, you look into
Just,
the
just,
old
uh,
Piranesi.
just before we keep going, mate, just plug your YouTube channel because I've been catching up on your videos. They're good fun, man. I like them. So, what's your YouTube channel for those who listen?
So YouTube channel is my name, Charles Kos, Kos. And I used to make a lot of radical videos. Now I've made some of the radical videos just members and subscribers only, but I'm still going to make the same amount of public videos, just a bit more accessible because I actually, you might notice, I send the viewers down these very limited rabbit holes, and every time I discover new stuff, I apply it to new videos. So this eventually I narrow down the audience so much that no one's going to watch because I alienate them with exactly, I alienate them with new ideas that they've never heard before on new idea, and
Mm,
so I have to. So those are private. So just there's going to be more accessible public videos. But yeah, Piranesi. They're,
Piramesi.
I call them Lego blocks, massive blocks underneath the Theatre of Marcellus in Rome, and they look to me slightly, you could say Tiwanaku-ish. I call them
Really?
giant
Okay.
Lego blocks. Yeah,
Yeah. So again, they built on the platform that was before.
yeah. They don't seem to be Roman.
I
Very
mean,
ancient.
I mean, okay. We talk about, there's these ancient sea battles. The Greek had their what was it? The fire. What was the fire called? You know, the liquid fire. They had the mirrors. They had this. They had that. I mean, when you talk about the Greeks razing Troy to the ground, it makes you wonder. Like, obviously, the story goes it's all arrows and swords and spears and these sorts of things. But the truth is, do we truly know? I mean, how do you, without gunpowder, how do you knock down, the biggest gate, obviously Trojan horse, but they eventually knocked the wall down. I mean, without some sort of explosives, how do you knock down a megalithic city? How do you raise these places to the ground? As we sort of, we spent 30 seconds in India, but the Mahabharata, I mean, that it's, as you say, nuclear war between Anunnaki and the Nephilim. Have you looked, actually, here's something that's, I wonder if you've looked into the melted castles in Scotland and stuff like that, the melted bricks and the melted castles that, like, it's like the wall, the castle's been attacked with something that's made the stone melt. And there's all these weird relics of castles and stuff with this melted stone on it. Like it's sort of like, what is that? Is that the hellfire or whatever the Greeks used to call it? I'm trying to remember the name of it. But it's basically they created this fire that they could throw at ships that would burn underwater, basically.
Yeah, I've looked slightly into that. The vitrified forts are indeed a mystery. The
Mm.
top of Sacsayhuaman is also like that, apparently, according to von Däniken. Although I do have a skeptical friend. He's always arguing with me on Facebook and saying, Charles, you're going too far. And he actually went up there and he actually said that it's not melted and vitrified at all. And he did send me some photographs, but
But surely at Tiwanaku, there's a hell of a lot more to marvel at than the fact that it's not melted. Like,
oh, exactly.
it's a long way to go to say it's not melted, and just that's.
Well, where there's smoke, there's fire. I think uh, there's something to this. I know Robert Schoch released a book a few years ago about the solar flares. I've read his previous books on pyramids. Haven't touched that one yet, but yeah, I'm a bit skeptical about that one. It seems like I always think the atmosphere might stop such a thing, or would it cook if it could melt the rock, it could cook half the planet.
Well,
What
this
would
is,
it
yeah,
do to us?
that's a pretty isolated, magnified thing, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like if they're zeroing in on one castle, well, they use a big giant magnifying glass or something. uh, which, look, if you had a flying machine, you could potentially harness the sun to point it at something. Maybe, I don't know. It's a hard one. I mean, the big conspiracy theory that they love to throw around about the vitrified castles is it was dragons. The dragons did it with their fire, with their breath. But dragons are cool too, man. Draw me a dragon if you've never seen one. And why do all dragons look the same?
Well, they're dinosaurs.
Yeah,
I think they're dinosaurs.
yeah. And it's
And this is
like, yeah,
part of the problem with geology again. I think a lot of geology is wrong, and a lot of geological formations were formed instantly in catastrophe, explaining why you have the trees going through coal seams, etc. Just a sudden phase change, and something goes from liquid to solid, as in chemistry, and it happens with
mhm.
rocks as well somehow. But they talk about millions of years and all this, and we
Well,
don't know.
petrification. I think when I looked into petrification, because I found this, there's a piece of it down in the cabinet there. I was working out in Western Queensland and I found this tree, massive tree that was petrified. The whole thing was petrified and it had all broken up into different pieces. So I got a piece in the cabinet there because it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in the middle of nowhere. And then, of course, I was in the middle of nowhere by myself looking after, was just supervising a yard for a couple of weeks. So I fell down the rabbit hole of, what is petrification? And it's like, well, things can be petrified in 80 years, or they can be petrified in thousands of years or millions of years. It's like, so you just gave me 600 words when you only really needed three. I don't know. Which we don't know. That's the honest truth about it. We don't know how long it takes anything to petrify. And I'm glad you're on board with that. That was what does catastrophe do to this stuff? I think it changes it. We Look, we're steering around weird corners. Let's roll with it. I mean, if you looked at some of the Indian, we go back to India for a second. There's quite clear motifs of people riding triceratops. People riding dinosaurs. I mean, how do you explain that? Like oh, it's just a joke. They just chucked it in there. You know, everything else is true though. It's amazing.
Well, exactly. And this is why I think lots of geology can't be true because they've deliberately, according to their paradigm, excluded the idea of catastrophism, which is actually essential. You can't have a chemical reaction without it being catastrophic
Mm.
sometimes. Not everything is gradual.
Well,
So therefore,
we drive around a thing that's basically, depending how many cylinders your car is, it's just multiple explosions happening in front of you the whole time. Like that's what's going on.
exactly. You want something to happen, there's going to be a bang and a few eggs are
Mm.
going to break, and that's the way it is, you know. It's,
Yeah, that's right.
it's otherwise nothing's going to happen.
Mm. Yeah,
As for dinosaurs, I've got a fun story for you. I don't know if you've heard this one. The 20th century dinosaur explorers in Africa. I think they went into the Congo looking for a stegosaurus. Have you heard of this?
no, I have not heard of this. Where
So
do we go? Let's go. Let's go and look
let's
for
go.
Stegosaurus.
The natives were telling these explorers, I forget the era, but could have been the 50s or the 60s or probably I think the 70s or the 80s. And they were telling them that there are certain lakes with hippopotami, but there are also certain lakes without hippopotami, and they'll have a stegosaurus. They call it an animal with planks on their back. I think Mokole Membe or something like that.
Mm.
And one of them was attacked by one of them. He was taken to hospital, and the explorers went to interview him, and they took him a book of dinosaurs, and they were flicking through the pages of the different pictures of dinosaurs for him to ask which one it was. When he saw the Stegosaurus, he hopped out of bed and ran away.
Interesting. Did they find the Stegosaurus, or they found it and then it got buried, and the Smithsonian's got it somewhere in a cage?
I reckon the latter. Well, that's the thing. Whatever they find, they're not going to say, "Oh, we found a Stegosaurus." Yeah, I mean, well, who really knows? Lots of science and lots of exploration and discovery, I think, as we know, doesn't get reported in the first place.
No, definitely not. And it's hidden because people are afraid of the masses. Come back to the tall poppy, some of the things we were speaking about earlier. I know when I was working in Papua New Guinea, in the highlands and the islands of Papua New Guinea, they were telling stories about what can only be described as a pterodactyl or a pterodactyl, uh, and the fact that pterodactyls still exist up there. And there's these old, and the problem is if you see anything on the internet these days, you can't trust it, right? But there's these old photos of old Papua New Guineans with a holding a bloody pterodactyl, right? A photograph. And look, I've been in those jungles, man. I've been up there in those highlands. Anything could be in there. Anything could be in there. And I think one of the stats that I'm throwing around at the moment that has blown me away, and I might have said it last time, but I've said it a few times recently, but it's worth saying again. How many years? So like fluffy pandas, black and white panda, eat bamboo, which is bright green. They're a bright white, bright black cat, a pretty dopey looking bear. So someone in the 1800s saw the skin of a panda in a hut. Okay, they're real. Now, let's remember too, in the 1800s, we're still hunting for our food. We're still in the bush all the time. We're still providing for ourselves, living off the land, all the above. Our skill sets are very proficient in that area. How many years did it take to find one panda? What do you reckon?
100?
Close, 60. 2 generations it took to find one dopey panda in a green bush, right? So it's like, then you layer that onto Yowies or Sasquatch or a bird, a dinosaur that can fly, or you know what I mean? Like you layer it onto everything else, and it's like, well, we didn't find a panda for 60 years when we were actually quite good at doing that sort of stuff. And the thing is, when I was talking to the Papua New Guinean guys about the pterodactyl, when I they're so matter of fact about it, and they want to be truthful with you. So because you're actually paying attention to them and hearing their stories and their legends. And yeah, they've got legends of people being plucked by bloody pterodactyls since forever. And if that species was going to survive, that'd be the place, right? There's no people there, massive mountains, massive highlands, abundance of food. Think about it. It's, and why not? I think, but again, if that was true, and I'm not saying it is, by the way, it's just a fun thought experiment, we wouldn't know anyway, as you say.
Quite true. We've got them in Australia as well, stories of dinosaurs,
Yes.
T-Rex stories. And let's not forget the bunyip, described as half emu, half crocodile.
Oh, it is too, the bunyip.
So you've got the bird, which is the dinosaur, and you've also got the reptile component.
I mean, that's the thing though about the latest stuff on dinosaurs is that they found those was a some sort of raptor that had feathers and it still had feathers in the fossil. So like, were they birds or were they, and it's like someone showed I was watching a reel and it was like someone showed a beaver tail and then someone showed a T-Rex tail. They look exactly the same. So was the T-Rex tail long and skinny like we're told, or did it look like a beaver's tail? Yeah, we don't. The thing is, we don't know. We like to think that we know, but we don't.
That's more evidence of the catastrophe, the recent catastrophe as well. That the fact that we can draw a dragon, we can draw a dinosaur by instinct almost.
Yeah, that's what I
And
mean. All dragons look the same. Draw
where
me a
are they?
dragon. Yeah, draw me a dragon if you've never seen one. And every dragon, every continent, every culture, the dragon looks the same. Everyone. So it's like, and it's like the Chinese zodiac, the Chinese New Year has 12 real animals and one fake one. Sure. Right. So all the other animals of the zodiac, apart from the dragon's fake. Yeah, I mean, where do those myths come from? There's got to be some elements of truth to them, I would think.
Quite right. I say that about fiction, fiction it has to come from truth because it has to be plausible. It has to be locked into our reality.
Yeah, it has to be elements of truth. The reason, I used to get analysis paralysis about talking about some of these subjects because some of the stuff we've bounced around again tonight. I love chatting with you, Charles. We could just sit here and talk for, if we didn't have to go to bed, we just keep talking. However, what if 1% is true? That's sort of what we work on here at UTC. So if you can take a massive chunk of, let's stay on the dragon topic, massive chunk about dragons. Mind you, so the story I tell about dragons, because it was many, many years ago now, because we're not even 35 anymore, Charles. Don't tell anyone. However, back in the 90s, I was looking into dragons and came across a documentary, like a black market video documentary from Europe, where these Swedish explorers were exploring the Alps, the untamed Alps, where people had, there was no record of anyone ever being there physically. And they kept finding fireweed that was burnt out and big scratch marks on the cliff faces. Again, where's a dragon going to hide? I think the Swiss Alps is probably a pretty good spot. Talking about good spots.
It's a good point. I mean, dragons, we know, according to legend, they live under mountains, which means they fly to mountains.
Mm-hmm.
We know eagles do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the giant eagles as well. You even just talk about raptor birds of prey. They theoretically, the Maoris hunted the massive eagle to extinction in New Zealand, but we had them here as well. Big giant birds.
That's incredible.
The megafauna. Actually, you'll enjoy this because you know about the giant wombat, wouldn't you? There used to be a massive giant wombat. When me and my wife first got together, I was telling her about the giant wombat, and she thought I was taking the piss out of her, right? Yeah, there's a big giant wombat because that, it's a funny story. If you're out camping, I said, yeah, I used to, when we go camping, like, yeah, did you know we used to have a giant wombat? It'd be a bloody bad night if a wombat the size of a high ace van come out of nowhere and started messing with us in our campsite. And I said, they used to live here. And she thought I was just being Aussie and taking the piss out of her, right? We go to the Brisbane Museum and they got a full skeleton of a giant wombat. I said, see, giant wombat. And she's like, I thought you were just trying to annoy me. I'm no, giant wombat. I mean, do you think, because we're completely random tonight and I'm just rolling with it, with the megafauna, do you think potentially the planet was different as far as the leaves and the, because we know the trees were much different. The bushland that we see in Australia is now is not the bushland that was here when they came here, right? The forests of Victoria, the forests of Queensland and northern New South Wales were trees that were 40 foot across, big, massive trees. I mean, vast percentage of the British Royal Navy that was the best that ever, in that time came from the trees down here, and they were massive. If you go to Mullumbimby, Richard Patterson took me up on a mountain trail, and there's a couple left, like stumps left, and they're massive, and they were considered to be babies. And these things are 10 meters across. They're unbelievable, but they was considered to be small trees. So, I mean, once upon a time here in Australia, we know for a fact that it was covered in giant trees. And there's still some down in Tasmania, actually. There's still some of the giant trees in Tasmania.
I saw one of those giant trees in Tassie. It had a sign on it, but I think on the sign I read that it wasn't even that big, and there used to be much bigger ones which were cut
Yeah,
down.
exactly. Yeah.
And but yeah, I remember I've got a photo of standing. I think it's at least 2 or 3 meters wide. I think
Mm,
it's the stump that's left. I'm not sure, but yeah, you're right. I do get the feeling sometimes when I went up north as well that Australia used to have very different types of trees, and possibly these eucalypts are just here because they're the trees for when it's warmer or when
mm.
it's desert-like conditions. But there's also other trees that used to be here, I think, as well. We've got those are they the Huon pines or that ancient pine?
Yeah, the Huon pine and the redwood. The redwoods were big in northern New South Wales. That was the ones that I saw. The big massive redwood trees, and they're the ones they built the boats out of as well. I'm pretty sure Australian redwood hardwood. I'm pretty sure. And they were massive, ginormous, like 10, 15, 20 meters across in diameter. Um, which means everything else would be larger. Because, yeah, and look, that thought just sort of came from what's a giant wombat eating? It's not just going to munch on the grass. You know what I mean? Like it's going to need something a bit larger than that. Large animal, large appetite. You know what I mean? Like there's got to be a balance there. Nature provides balance. And I wonder about that with the megafaunal extinctions.
That's a very good point. Big animals need lots of other big animals
Mm,
and lots of good grass as well.
that's right. And you would think that, well, I think they believe that the giant wombat was a herbivore. So that means it was a prey animal, which means there was something bigger than it that ate it, right? So it's like, what are we actually talking about here? And it's I find when I have these conversations with someone like yourself is that we say all these things, but my mind immediately goes to try and picture them, and then I realize that we've got no idea, Charles. It's just a reinforcement that we have no idea about really anything. Like we see what's in front of us, and we're dealing with echoes and bits of a puzzle. But do we actually really know? We got no idea. No idea.
It's a good point, actually. And actually, it brings me to something else I've just thought of because, well, we know that Africa still has the megafauna, so Africa might have been spared.
Yes.
Europe's lost most of its megafauna except a very rare bison, so it was
Hmm.
hit.
Hmm.
Australia's lost its megafauna as well. Possibly it was hit as well by
Hmm.
whatever happened.
Hmm.
India, Indian elephant. So they were spared because they've got that
Yeah.
Indian. So that
They got
that
the tiger, they
megafauna
got
was
the
spared.
monkeys, they got the elephants, they got, yeah, there's still, yeah.
So their Mahabharata tales have also survived, possibly from very ancient times. Maybe we're
Hmm.
talking 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years ago. Memories.
How do we know? Like, it's like, how do we, which cataclysm are we talking about? Right. So the two major ones are 70,000 and 13,000. We're just using round numbers. There's 50,000 years in between that. Right. And the thing is, if you think about, if we take that the 70,000 year one is what they say it was, which was a super volcano release, the Sumatran volcano, that happened just up the road, mate. You know what I mean? Like, that's just, it's a few hours north of here. That's where that happened. So I imagine that Australia, be curious to see whether that's the marker for our megafauna. I don't know. That'd be curious. There's a little bit of tidbit of research. We should write that down. I'm going to write that down because I wonder whether that correlates, whether it's the 70,000 years ago or whether or not we had megafauna in that gap between 70,000 and 13,000.
Well, there's two more big ones as well. Maybe not as big as those two. The 30,000 year ago Carolina Bays,
Mm.
and the one that caused the recent Dark Ages in Western Europe, which I think might have caused Justinian to try and retake over Western Europe 1,500 years ago.
Yeah, that was the help with the fall of Rome. Yeah, the mini ice age was that 543 or five. There's like 15 years in there somewhere where the sun didn't come up or something like that.
Exactly, and in the British Chronicles of the Dark Ages, it talks about all the churches in England collapsing, falling to the ground. And here's another thing: when William the Conqueror went into Britain, he didn't occupy existing stone fortresses. He had to build new ones from scratch. He built them on old mounds, which we now know are from 3000 BC, such as Merlin's Mound, and
Mm,
he threw up a little fence around them and called it a castle. Why? Weren't there any castles there?
that's interesting. What do they think that? I mean, I don't know whether you've heard the theory that that one in for the 500s is potentially a double impact in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Potentially. Yeah, I did I did a podcast about that many years ago as well called Double Impact. It was just a shortcast. There was a paper being written about it, and I've got another research folder somewhere where you can see the chevrons in the Gulf of Carpentaria, and apparently the Gulf of Carpentaria sort of has two craters in it, and they think that potentially that the because the thing about the mini ice age is it's recorded in the tree rings in Japan, so it affected Asia as well. So it wasn't just Western Europe. So it was something that affected majority of the planet. That one.
It may have been many impacts in that case. So,
Yeah. Well, that was going to be
and
my next thing. Do we go through a little impact field? Mate, give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to pause for 2 seconds, mate. Give me 2 seconds. We're back. Appreciate that, mate. I had the thought I had before we stopped was one of the ideas we didn't explore in depth that we spoke about last time. Let's bring it right back because that's what we do here at UTC. These megalithic structures we talked about last time, and you agreed with me that there were mapping cataclysm. So, do you think they're mapping the torrid media stream? Do you think when you say they're mapping cataclysm, what's your interpretation of that?
100% they're mapping cataclysm. Our calendar maps cataclysm. It's based on the millennium.
Mm-hmm.
I
So
think I
expand
mentioned
for
last
me.
time.
So we're
Exactly. I
talking
think I
about the
mentioned,
cycle of the equinox. Is that what we're talking about?
um, we're talking about they call it mundane astrology. Have you heard of this term?
No, expand for me.
The Persians were experts in this. So it's based on a planetary alignment. So alignments are bad, and when it's spaced out, it's good. And that led me to the idea then, oh, they must be these alignments are a clockwork of bad and good. In other words, if the planets are together, it lets the meteors in. I think you pointed that out
Yes, that's
as
right.
well
Yep.
last
Yep.
time,
Yep.
which is I came to the same conclusion. the Persians specialized in this. There was a Persian prophet, or you could call it not really a prophet, but a great astrologer. We don't even, the Bible doesn't even record his name, even though although we do know his name, even though it records the three wise men adopting his teachings and trying to spread them to the Holy Land and saying in the year zero, essentially a new king would arrive. And the
Mm.
reason for that is that's the millennium cycle of destruction, the end of the
Okay.
world. Christianity is based on the idea of the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Armageddon. Yeah, rocks. And do
World
you know what I
ends
found?
now.
Yeah.
Hmm,
And do you know what I found interesting about the biblical interpretation of Armageddon? What is it? Rocks from the sky, giant flood, volcanoes, everything else like that. Sounds to me like the last cataclysm. You know what I mean? Like that's exactly what happened. Giant rocks came from the sky, giant flood happened, which would have caused volcanoes and magnetic disruptions and blah, 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 blah. Again, we go back to the fact that maybe we're the survivors of that cataclysm, and that was the recording, that story was the recording, and then we just took advantage of it.
exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think, I mean, there's multiple versions, isn't there? So you got the Yugas, we talk about India, the Kali Yuga, and at the moment we're supposedly in the Kali Yuga, the time of chaos, which I could have told you that. I didn't need the Indians to tell me that. We've got the cycle of the equinox, which obviously 1 degree of the equinox equals 72 years, which is the average lifespan of a Homo sapien. We've got the Mayan calendar, which I think we sort of touched on a little bit last time. I have to ask because we're probably not even going to get to Confessions of the Gods. I'll tell you what, we're going to dedicate an episode to this one. All right, I'm going to read it properly because I've sort of just been cherry picking things that I find interesting, but I will go through and I'll read it correctly, and we'll dedicate an episode to Confessions of the Gods, because the other thing that we're not talking about potentially is the 10th planet. Are they mapping when the 10th planet comes back closer to Earth, potentially? Because then that would cause a whole heap of problems. A big giant metal planet passes close to us. Not only is it probably going to drag asteroids with it, but it's going to mess up the magnetics of our planet and blah, blah, blah. The list goes on.
That's a very good point. I've read some of Sitchin, and they certain people used to rubbish him, but I also think that these people are the same people that wouldn't like to believe this stuff, even if it was written in there in the first place. They would be opposed to it.
Mm. Well,
And I
it
think a lot of what
didn't suit the
Sitchin says,
narrative.
well, yeah, a lot of what Sitchin says really is in the text. I think he took some liberties,
Of
as they
course he
say,
did. Mm.
but who doesn't? Everyone is translates things
Well,
in a slightly different way.
why do you think we can have such a cool conversation, Charles? You've looked at things a different way that I've looked at them. We both have our perceptions, but I guarantee we've both looked at the same research in a lot of ways, like both same papers, same books, and we've both drawn our own conclusion, our own interpretation of the data. So, of course, he took some liberties. We did a fair bit on Sitchin a little while ago, or actually Max Egan's book, um, EFS, Earth's Forbidden Secrets, I think it is. We read that book, and he goes into a lot of Sitchin stuff, which sent me down the Sitchin rabbit hole. And it was curious. One of the reactions I had was automatically bad, Sitchin bad. Like there was an automatic, because I was part of the zeitgeist. So we get sucked in as well every now and again. It's like Sitchin bad. Then I started looking into Sitchin stuff, and I'm like, well, no one else has spent 50 years trying to read the Sumerian tablets. I'm sure he got a little bit wrong. Have no doubt about that. And I'm sure he liked telling a good story. But I don't think it's all incorrect. Like I think, are you going to spend 50 years on one thing? Like that's what he did and wrote books about it. So I imagine that, again, we come back to what if 1% is true, you know?
Exactly. And there's more to it. I mean, if Sitchin is wrong, do you then go to the Indian texts and then say, oh, well, they must be wrong too, and they actually don't describe nuclear weapons when they clearly do?
Hmm.
They clearly
Well,
describe high technology. Sumerians is just another. It's the same stories, but different stories have survived, but still based on that high technology past.
I'm pretty sure it's the Sumerian texts that in their cataclysm texts, they said that the cataclysm was so bad that they had to flee the planet. And it doesn't matter which way you translate that text, that's what it says. What do you mean flee the planet? If that's what they're talking about, that means they had potentially had the ability to flee the planet. Like, and isn't it this? It's the Sumerians as well that describe Earth as the seventh planet. Is that? I think it's the Sumerians. I'm pretty sure that describe Earth as in some of their texts as the seventh planet. Now, how do you get us to be the seventh planet, Charles? Outside in, mate.
Yes, that's interesting. That is. Uh, it implies to me that implies a bigger knowledge, at least a bigger knowledge of astronomy than we give them credit for, because they're counting them in a different way. They're counting the moons as well, the mini planets.
Mm-hmm.
They're counting maybe asteroids like Ceres as a planet. How did they see
Mm-hmm.
that? They must have had telescopes. I'm sure they did have telescopes.
Well, they had to have. I mean, there's the most accurate depiction of the solar system that we find in ancient culture is the Sumerian depiction, and that's one of the first cultures. Like, again, come back to, as we always come back to technology. How do you know? Like we didn't discover Pluto till when? 1800s or something like that, or 17, 1800s when the mirrors got good enough.
Oh, the 1930.
Yeah. So there you go. So the Sumerians knew Pluto was there, right? Just as an aside, too, the fact they discounted Pluto as a planet and Pluto's the god of war and chaos. I don't know, insulting the god of war and chaos was such a good idea a few years ago, as he gestures vaguely. Pissing off Pluto maybe not have been the best plan, but whatever. Whatevs. You'll be good. It should be, I'm sure it's fine. But again, technology. What technology did they have in order to understand how many planets were in the solar system? How do you know that?
Exactly. I've got a little tidbit for you. I
Throw
did
it at
make a
me.
video uh, a few years back. South of Stonehenge is a serpentine type mound. And the scholars don't talk about this. It's a string of barrows, and they call it the Normantown barrows, the Normanton barrows. But it's
Mm-hmm.
actually in the shape of a serpent. And I counted all the mounds up, and it seems to be an accurate description of our solar system. And it's got four inner planets. Then it's got a bit of spacing, and it seems to have the outer planets. It seems to have Pluto as well, and then it's got extra beyond that.
Really?
And one of my fans, he went down there, and he filmed the area. I think I put some film in the video as well, or at least some
Mm-hmm.
photos.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's a depiction of the solar system as a serpent, as a cosmic serpent. But it
Okay.
also shows something about the ancient astronomy of mundane astrology, using planetary alignments and their clockwork to calculate the age of the universe. So the ancient Iranians, for example, they said the world started with an alignment in, I think, 30,000 BC. So that could be that seems to line up to me with the Carolina Bays catastrophe. So they got ideas of going back to that. But because this is
Right.
megalithic
That's their
information,
zero. Is that their zero 30,000 years, which is the time of
that's
the
the
car?
yeah, I think 33,000 or 30,000 or something like that is the mundane astrologer's year zero in ancient Persia, and that actually is similar to some of the Sumerian gods datings
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
kings as well, from memory, or the
Yeah.
Babylonian
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this is really megalithic.
The Babylonian is it? Well, Babylon's megalithic as well. Like, so all these towns are Iran, Samaria, Eridu. Eridu is unbelievable. That's supposedly the first town, again, in the middle of nowhere. But what's left in the desert, the footprint of Eridu is amazing. And again, that's the first city, and it was that good, straight up. Like, we're just going to build a megalithic city. That's what we're doing. Straight out of the caves. That's it. I've had enough. What about you, Charles? Can't we've had enough, mate. Let's just go and build megalithic towers.
Yeah. The archaeologists definitely have some tunnel vision around the idea of the Fertile Crescent being the only home of ancient humanity.
That's true. Absolutely. Yeah. No, you are very true. You are very true. Look, I mean, I'm sure you might have, being Australian, I'm sure you've looked at some of this evidence as well. There's not insignificant evidence to say that maybe we originated here. Maybe. If you follow the Palladian myth that echoes through multiple cultures, that's 780,000 years ago. The seven sisters of the Pallades got chased by the three brothers of Orion across the stars to here. And there was a big crystal spaceship in low Earth orbit. And if you go out into the Aussie bush right now, you will find what is called australite tektite. And even NASA says that apparently 800,000 years ago, there was some crystalline thing that fell from low Earth orbit. Didn't impact, it just fell, which is the reason australite tektite looks like buttons, because it didn't have the velocity. It just fell out of orbit. And the story goes that was a war between the gods, and they blew the crystal spaceship up and it fell out of orbit. And the Palladians were modifying a hominid on this planet to create us because they couldn't exist here. And that's not just the Australian Indigenous creation story. That is the creation story for multiple Indigenous cultures across multiple continents across the globe.
It's a very good point. And you
know,
know, there's evidence, right? We're looking at evidence when we look at each other right now. Look what we're wearing. We're wearing these beanies. It's
Yep.
winter.
Yep.
Canadians call these toques, right? So they know what we're talking about. We're rugged up. You're even rugged up in Queensland.
Mm-hmm.
Animals don't need to do this.
No, they don't, mate. No, they
Why
don't.
do we
We're not,
need to do this?
because we're not finished, mate, is why.
Exactly.
We're not a finished product, man. If and you know, the big thing for me with the evolution on this planet, if we truly evolved on this planet, we'd be able to swim better. Right? If a planet that's got three-quarters water and we're the dominant species of the planet, we should be able to swim better if we evolved here. You know, but we're not finished, mate. We're frail. I mean, my lower back is giving me the my lower back sore today. Right? We're not finished. We have faults. And it speaks to the fact that, I mean, so your intervention over evolution then, Charles, I take it.
At the end of the day, every observation that, or at least so many observations, actually come back to an explanation in the ancient astronaut theories that were so popular in the 60s. And I love that counterculture of the 60s. You might get it from reading the Confessions, and you'll see that I put a lot of that, you know, that free spirit of thinking into that book.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much, but that 60s era, that was like some saw that as a new awakening. There was a revolution against the old order, against the old Art Deco times. And they thought we're really going to push the envelope here and stretch things out and see how far our logic goes. And a lot of this ancient astronauts ideas, it wasn't just von Daniken. He copied earlier authors who were saying the same thing. Many early.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Forgotten.
And again, we talk. It's interesting you mentioned the 50s and the 60s because I think World War II was obviously catastrophic for the planet, but the doctrine that we exist under now was designed coming out of World War II. And, you know, and look, let's just take Australia's Stonehenge, found in 1932 or 3 or 4, whatever it was. Not actually 38, I think it was found when it was surveyed. That was lost once the war started. And, you know, there's so many things. And you would have done the same. I've done that as well. You know, I want to have the resources to go and spend a week in the Library of New South Wales or Victoria and like focus in on explorer diaries and reports from the in between the war period from 1918 through to 1939. There was so much stuff and so many ideas that were being thrown around and founded and seen, and so many things were explored after the war, though, gone, because now we have the school system to make factory workers was perfected.
You're right about that. So much was destroyed, and ideas were destroyed with the war as well. You know, the German
Absolutely.
world ice theory. Have you heard of that?
No, no, expand for us.
So the world ice theory was based on several German thinkers, including German Tiwanaku researchers who fit their idea of the evolution of Tiwanaku into the world ice theory. And they did see a big uplift of the Andes in recent times, and they did figure this into their theory because they
Because that is one of those theories, isn't it? A lot of those megalithic structures on top of the mountains weren't always on top of the mountains. That they during cataclysm there was a massive uplift and they got shot into the sky, basically.
Yes, the Germans with this world ice theory, they had an idea from memory that there was a all the water was trapped near the equator, and this all spilled out with the cataclysm. And then there was also an uplift as well. There's a book I have called the
Well, that's
Tiwanaku
that's
Calendar.
that's isostatic depression or compression. That's what they're talking about there. When the ice gets released, think about the weight of the ice on whatever plate it's sitting on, and as soon as the ice gets released, the other end of that plate goes, whoop, you know what I mean, and shoots up, and that's the look at it. It's not in what the ice is interesting though, Charles. So global warming is going to kill us all. Apparently, we've heard that I don't know how many times in our lifetime. However, the ice chases the poles. Notice they don't talk about the ice anymore. That it's melting. The ice is melting. It's melting. The ice isn't melting. The ice chases the poles. Okay, so if we grab our little prop here, our little globe, at the moment, the poles are theoretically north-south. They're not. They're beginning to converge, which is kind of scary. However, what if the poles were here on the equator at some point? What that does is freeze Antarctica up. Antarctica has no ice on it anymore because the ice chases the poles. Right. And we know that Antarctica once existed without ice because that's what they're finding. With the poles moving, the ice is melting, but it's chasing the pole. And we see trees in Antarctica. So at some point, Antarctica was free of ice. Maybe the poles were on the equator, which maybe explains what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think Hapgood presented some really good evidence in his book on this. That I think he said the pole used to be in North America or somewhere like that. He presented some excellent evidence that there was a recent pole shift.
Hmm.
And in fact, a lot of this might explain the so-called ice ages. The ice simply moved to a different part of the planet.
Yeah, that's
But
right. Yeah.
yeah, and the German world ice theory was similar to this. I think it was saying that the ice was actually that the polar regions were a lot icier than they used to be, and this is where the German Superman evolved in the cold, icy regions, and the equator was just water, and then the water burst. I think he called it the girdle belt. Yeah, he called it. This was a bloke called Herbiger, and I think Himmler presented this book to Hitler, and Hitler said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good theory." But because of that endorsement, this theory is gone.
Yeah,
This is all
that
gone.
theory is no longer relevant.
It's like a different type of ice age theory, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a catastrophism theory as well. So the
Mm-hmm.
Germans were actually pushing a catastrophism theory, and that's part of the reason we're not into that anymore, to our
Yeah,
detriment,
that's
possibly
part
in
of it.
some
That is
ways.
part of it for sure. I mean, and look, you can't, you want to fall down a weird rabbit hole. The German love of the occult and all the pyramids and the magic and the crystals, and like they were big into that. They were huge into that stuff. They really, uh, like they were going all over the planet. I mean, where we talk about the Vatican, we talk about the Library of Alexandria. What about the Nazi vaults, mate? There's got to be a few of those left, like what's hiding in there? Like there's some stuff I guarantee we haven't found yet. Or if we did find it, it's in the Vatican.
And good points. And in fact, the German, like that logo that the Germans used, it's unlawful even to look at it now. But so I'll just call it the logo.
Mm.
But even that, I believe I
It was a
believe that
symbol of
was
peace. It's a Buddhist symbol of peace.
exactly, but it was exactly, and it was being used by a kind of a society, and this was their political wing
Mm.
in some ways, or it started out as their political wing of another society which used this symbol because this symbol is an esoteric symbol.
It's one of the 33. It is one of the 33 symbols that echo around the world. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not a political symbol,
No.
or it's an esoteric symbol,
Mm.
which means that
It-
this movement is partly had esoteric founders in
yeah,
some
and
ways.
we could all, if we bring it back to something we were discussing earlier, it's almost alchemical in nature, that symbol as well. That's part of the 33 symbols that exist everywhere. And apparently there was a version of that that was used as a navigational device, right? Where you rotate that a certain way to find different cardinal directions. And there's some navigational device properties to that maybe the ancient indigenous of Australia used. And that's something that I'm looking into because the imprint site, I've been doing some more research on that since we last spoke. That's always going on. And yeah, potentially that's what that is. It's an imprint of a navigational aid of some kind. And it does resemble that symbol, the swastika.
Wow.
So again, echoes on echoes, right? Echoes on echoes. And when I figured out that the ice chases the poles, that then opened up everything else because it's like, okay, and it's curious, right? Even let's say, so here's North America. You can't really see it, but here's North America here on the globe. Yeah. So the story goes that the ice shelf that was sitting over North America and Canada was 2 miles high, right? Which again, we just say that 2 miles high, Charles. Think about that for just a nanosecond. That is 3.2 kilometers of ice that way, right? Just contemplate that just for a minute. Okay. That's a hell of an ice wall. So that means that the magnetic poles were stable at about here, right? So here's where the poles are now. Okay. If we take the pole over North America, that means the poles were here. They're on an angle. Okay. That puts the South Pole on the other side of Antarctica, basically in between, on the way to Africa, right? So the ice would have been near Africa as opposed to Australia. That's that's how the poles were before the last ice age or before the cataclysm. And they were obviously there for quite a while. Even that opens up most of Antarctica to being, it'd be cold, but it would be inhabitable. There would be stuff there.
It's a good point. It explains the Antarctica on some of the ancient maps.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, when I was in some of these areas which would have been under the pole in America, I was there in 2017 and we drove around all around Michigan and the Ford F-150 down into Ohio, saw the Serpent Mound.
Mm.
But
Oh,
around
what's that
Michigan,
like?
oh, it's great. It's on a mountain, by the way.
Really?
I'll tell you about Serpent Mound. So basically, when you go, so Michigan is like a flat. It's like it's been flattened by something. It's like I felt like I was in the Arctic if it was colder. So
Mm.
flat landscape. Then you go down south into Ohio. It's mountainous, Appalachian
Mm-hmm.
Mountains,
Mm-hmm.
and you see the Amish. You see sort of hillbilly people with their houses up in the hills. It's a poorer area, and you go up all these, and it's in quite a mountainous areas because it's got a good view. And Serpent Mound, you go into the car park. Oh, there's some actually round barrows, the same as they build in England.
Right.
There's round mounds.
Mm-hmm.
You go up to it, and it's actually quite beautiful. It's not very tall. It's about 3 foot tall, the mound,
Mm-hmm.
and you can walk around it. And it's got different parts of the snake aligned to different lunar sands
Yeah,
and so
absolutely. Yep.
forth.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Another thing I saw, when you go all the way to the head, it looks like a snake that's about to leap off the mountain.
Oh, okay.
So where's it going? Yeah, where's it going? And then in the distance, I saw a pyramid-shaped hill. It's pointing towards a pyramid-shaped hill in the distance. Now, the YouTuber NEXT, sorry,
Yep.
he went there a couple of years ago. I told him to have a look for this, but he didn't see it because the trees have grown a bit. I was there in 2017. There were trees about to cover the view, unfortunately. So, but there
Mm.
is a view. It's one of those megalithic landscapes where it points to other alignments on the horizon. You see this at
Yes.
Stonehenge.
Yep.
You see this at many other, and this is a sign of the megalithic builders
Mm. And we and
right
we
across the
always
landscape.
we always need to remember that Teotihuacan looked like a mountain until the 1930s. The biggest pyramid that we've ever found just looked like a hill until the 1930s. Me and the boys actually play a game when we go hunting or when we go out bush or whatever it is, and it's spot the pyramid. And like, there's probably like in Queensland, there's probably three or four hills that are just in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, geez, I'd like to get a shovel and just dig into the side of that for a minute and see whether we hit stone or not. There's like three or four that I've seen traveling throughout Western Queensland and up through Roma and all those sorts of things. There's three or four that I've seen. It's like, spot the pyramid, all right. That really looks like one. If you take Teotihuacan and how it looked and the shape of it and everything else like that, and you look at that and go, you know. Well, that leads me to we haven't even really covered what we wanted to cover tonight, mate. But that's excellent. I feel we're approaching the 2 hour mark, so our time's probably coming to an end again. However, not that the conversation hasn't stopped. All that's going to happen is we're both going to listen back to this and think of 1,000 other things, and we haven't even touched on the confessions of the gods yet. However, where do you sit, considering we're just throwing all the theories out tonight, where we're bouncing around? What about the mud flood stuff? So the fact that Teotihuacan was covered in dirt, right? The fact that it was covered in dirt and trees and everything, there seems to be a layer of dirt. I mean, this leads a little bit to Tartaria, which leads to flat Earth, but we'll leave flat Earth alone, right? Don't touch that. But there does seem to be layers of modern civilization, what we would call modern civilization, under the ground. Like, I know we have some here in Brisbane. If you ask the right questions, there's some of those really old buildings that were built in the 1700s that have another layer underneath them.
Okay, so there's two directions I want to go with this. One is that direction. So let
Hmm.
me start off by saying Uluru is caked in mud. There's a mud layer on it. It's black. It's actually a black blue stone, but it's covered in a kind of muddy soil, is what I saw, that you can crumble away. That the top layers of the rock you can just crumble up.
Really,
So I
I
thought
didn't know that. Okay,
it's well, I noticed it when I was there, and I've made a couple of videos of it.
because it is ironstone, isn't it? Isn't the Uluru
Yeah.
ironstone? Yeah.
But apparently it's not the color that it seems to be. It's a dark color. They say it's a dark blackish color.
Mm.
So straight away I thought, okay, this Uluru, because it's such a unique type of stone, they said it was formed in some river estuary or something. I'm thinking this, and because the fact that it's so close to Catachuca, which is also very unique,
Yes.
and that to me when I was there, it seemed like a conglomerate type of stone held together by mud. Much of
Mm.
it. Firstly, it feels like you're on. It looks like Mars. It looks exactly like Mars when you're there. It's extremely hot, Tanami
Mhm.
Desert. But
Yeah,
the whole thing,
of all my stuff up north, I never got to the big rock. It's on the list.
you'll go one day. But the,
Mm.
the Katachuka, to me, it seemed like a conglomerate type of stone which you would get in a catastrophe. So I thought, okay, these are formed in a catastrophe.
Mm.
So I thought, were they both formed from an impact that happened? So we have some mud flood possibilities there. As for the pyramids, they brought that soil there. That was part of the ritual. There is a 50 BC, you'll see in the pyramids book, a 50 BC mound
Mm.
in Ireland. What happened? It started out as a hut. They burned it to the ground. It had a central oak tree beam in the middle, which might have been a carved totem pole, as they did do in the Pacific Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
They burned it down. They covered the whole thing into a mound, and they found that they brought the soil from all over Ireland to put on that mound to build it up. So I thought this is part of the pyramid religion because they did the same thing in Mexico. They just kept bringing soil and bringing soil. They might have done the same thing to the Bosnian pyramid because they had to dig the soil off of it.
Hmm.
And or whatever it was, even if it's natural, they might have
So
brought
do
soil to
you,
it.
okay, so you're postulating that some of these megalithic sites, such as Teotihuacan, I mean that's massive. That's a lot of dirt and a lot of considering they didn't have buckets or a loader or you know what I mean. That's a lot of dirt to move by hand, supposedly. However, do you think you're postulating that some of this stuff was buried on purpose? Do you think maybe prior to the cataclysm to get it to survive, or what are you thinking?
Well, um, Göbekli Tepe was also buried.
I've heard contention about that recently, where they don't think it was,
Maybe, maybe not.
but how was it not buried? Why is it underground then, if it wasn't buried on purpose?
Yeah, I think they said it was deliberately buried because it looked like it had been messed up or something like that.
Mm.
Um,
But again, how do you move logistically and technologically? How do you move metric tons of dirt? A big chain, like a big, like, because theoretically they have what, reed buckets, maybe.
I'm not sure. Well, but bear in mind, there's another thing that was buried, Silbury Hill. Silbury Hill. When you go on a tour there, the tour guide will tell you this was carved out of chalk. It's got like I think 7 steps. It's a chalk step pyramid, about 3000 BC. And the tour guide said, and then the people came and buried it. Why would they do a thing like that? Why would they bury it? It seems to be, and you see this again and again in the pyramid religion around the
Mm,
world.
mm.
They bring the soil as if to bless the soil, to take it to the heartland, to the pyramid, put their soil there. That soil is now magically connected to their homeland a few kilometers away or wherever, blessing it. That's
Uh,
my idea.
okay, so do you think then are we looking at separate cultures? Is this the Earth culture worshipping the pyramid culture? They didn't build them; they were just worshipping them.
Possibly. So, you know how it was always thought we're Caucasian because we're from the Caucasus.
Yeah, we hid in a cave for 1,000 years and lost the melanin in our skin, and that's the reason we're white.
Yeah.
Pretty
So
much.
I looked into some Ossetian gods. One of the chief gods is called Sal, and Silbury Hill seems to be named after this god, but it also is our word for soil. So this god is in the soil. He is the god. This is sacred. And that just occurs to me now that the word soil is from Sal, or
Mm,
and because he was the chief god, he gave us salt. We put the salt into the bread to make it grow a bit better, to preserve it. We put the salt into other things to
to
preserve the
preserve it,
food.
yeah, yeah.
Some alchemy is named after him as well.
Mm.
These are ideas.
They are ideas. Isn't it fascinating though that salt originates is an old god's name? you know, and it's so many things like that that we see every day, we interact with every day that no one even thinks about. That are what's like the eye of Horus behind me. Then they chopped someone down the middle, and guess what? The third eye looks exactly like that, right? How did they know that? Like there's so many of these things, so many of these echoes. So see, to me, what I just heard then is that that was a separate culture that was worshipping whoever built the pyramids. Because I mean, the thing about who built all this stuff, as you know, Charles, the gods did it, right? That's the story, isn't it? The gods did it. The gods did it. The gods did it. How old are these gods, man? Like what are we talking about? Are we talking about hundreds of thousands of years? What are we talking about? It's hard to, because I think the timeline is so skewed. If we release our inhibitions and we look at things objectively and logically, how old is some of this stuff? Like the things that are underneath the things. Because I mean, don't forget too that in South America, that some of those pyramids are like Russian nesting dolls, right? So there's a smaller pyramid and a bigger one, a bigger one, a bigger one, a bigger one, a bigger one. How old is the first one? You know, what are we actually talking about here? And how many tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of years old are we? You know, these,
It's true. And even the carbon dates don't match the archaeology for the Giza. You know, the 60s carbon dates, and I think they did some more recent ones in the 70s and 80s. And I think the ones in Khufu are more like 3,700 BC rather than 2,700 BC.
yeah.
And I think the ones from memory in the third dynasty pyramid of Zozo is more like 4,000 BC or early, or 4,500 in the inner layers.
Mm,
So, because there's some organic material in there,
yeah.
so that they've been fiddling with these sites for a lot older than the pyramids have been there or in their
Mm,
current form.
mm. Or were they always there, mate? You know, like, is it one of those things? They were always there.
Well,
And we just, you know, it's a landing platform for the aliens from Stargate. No. Whoop. Sorry, just smashing stuff. Mate, well, geez, we went some places tonight, sir, didn't we? We did it again. We're just gonna. I don't know how we wrap this up because it's like all that's happened now is we just opened another 400 rabbit holes. So this is a real pleasure, Charles. This is a real pleasure, mate. I love riffing with you and the openness with which we can have a discussion, just exploring ideas, not being tied to any of them. Because somewhere along everything that we discussed is the thread of truth. You know, it's in there somewhere. You know, it's in there somewhere in these echoes, in these symbols, in these sites. And I think, you know, the freedom of these discussions is so important because it's neither of us are tied to any of the ideas we spoke about tonight. Given the evidence, we would both change our minds. Uh, However, we also can't deny that these cultures exist, these stories exist, these myths and legends supposedly exist, and there's so many things that are carried through to this day that we don't even that people that aren't aware of just don't see, do they? You know, like we're surrounded by it all the time, every day. You know, like a couple of days' time, it's going to be Thor's Day. You know. We haven't even touched on the Norse gods yet and whether or not they were aliens, because again, you know, Odin rides a great chariot across the sky. You know, Thor is the god of thunder, can harness the sky and harness the lightning and harness this and harness that.
you're very right. It's ancient mythology. This ancient astronaut theory, it didn't start in the 60s. It started in ancient times.
Mm-hmm. And it's the stories. And, you know, I'd love to come back to India. I think we're finishing up. The Mahabharata, some of that, there was a section of the Mahabharata that to my eye, because I was in spare parts for so long, that was my first career, right? So I read a lot of operators manuals, a lot of parts manuals, a lot of manuals for machines. A lot of that Mahabharata reads like a flight manual, mate. That's what it reads like to me. Some of it, it's like this is the book you give the pilot, so he understands how to operate the machine. That's what it reads to me. It's like, you know, I tell you what is oppressive in India is those stone chains. Have you seen that stuff? Like the chains that are made out of just one piece of stone?
I haven't seen it.
Check that out. There's also a big, massive iron pillar in India that never rusts. And when you ask the ancient most, where's it from? It was always there. So then think about that answer. It was always there. And then layer how old the Indian culture is. You know what I mean? It was all, what do you mean it was always there? You know, and I never thought about the alchemical symbols. Well, it's the same as the zodiac, isn't it, Charles? No one knows who named the zodiac, but the zodiac's always existed.
That's right. I believe these are all from the megalithic civilization.
That's the
We've just
echoes
got
out of,
echoes.
yeah, it's the builder culture. Yeah. You know, same with, well, the curious one is that, you know, everyone was looking for Atlantis and no one thought to look in the Atlantic Ocean, right? And then I went, oh, hang on a minute, who named the Atlantic the Atlantic? No one knows, man. No, it's just named that. Maybe it was named that because that's, you know, just take the C out and add an S. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not that difficult.
It belongs in the Atlantic. Yeah.
Mm. Well, mate, is there anything? It's hard to know where to stop because I think we're just continuing to riff. But is there anything you wanted to bring up tonight that we haven't spoken about? Do we not expand on something enough, or you just flat out remembering what we spoke about?
Yeah, it's we've talked about so many different things. Yeah, we can really go on and share more information, and we'll go all night, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, we can't go all night. Well, but look, as again, it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you on. And for the listeners, Charles is going to be part of Sacred Site too, as well, aren't you, mate? We're entering into negotiations as to how we're going to do that and what we're going to do. That's going to be very cool because Australia has its own story to tell, and I want to share some of my research with you, and we'll share our research, and we'll see. You know, I think collaboration is the word of the day, mate. I think with that, so very much looking forward to that. Look, guys, I think the only thing that comes to me to sort of wrap this one up in a bow is use this conversation as a really good example to be open because we discussed so many different things tonight without bias, without conflict, without anything apart from a curiosity into these mysteries. And I think there's a there's something to be said to do that in life at all times. You know, I think that's because the reality is, as much as me and Charles, we're now another 2 hours in, and I'm sure we'll talk in between the next show as we've been talking regularly off the mic. We could wax lyrical for I don't know who knows how long this series is going to go for, Charles. I feel like it's going to. At this point, I think we're both going to be grey and old. Megalithic Discussion, part 157. uh, but you know, I think that's what comes to me. You know, and do you want to add anything to that, mate?
Well, there's so much to unpack. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? Because all the books are gone by the great catastrophes and by the recent catastrophes, and the recent catastrophes that mainstream science doesn't even acknowledge
That's
happened.
exactly. They don't even acknowledge that they exist. Yep.
I mean, we're just struggling to get a handle on all this, but they've left echoes.
Mm,
They've left things behind, such as some Masonic ideas,
mm,
alchemy,
mm.
music. Why was music considered so? Why was it held in such high esteem in the Middle Ages? We don't know.
Well, the bells. The bells is another story as well, isn't it? The bells in the churches.
Mm.
I mean, music, sound, vibration, everything's energy, Charles. And I think, you know, the ether is the thing that joins everything else together. And I think through magnetics and the ether, that's how we're harnessing energy properly, the free energy that Tesla talked about. That's surrounding us all the time, you know, and I think that's why music is so important. You know, I think there's I can't remember the guy who's doing the work, but it's like each element has its own frequency, and that frequency is a musical note as well.
It,
You
it's
know,
and it is Pythagoreanism.
mm,
Why were the people in the Middle Ages basically teaching something that only Pythagoras invented in ancient Sicily?
mm,
This was a worldwide knowledge.
mm. And I think when I have discussions like this, whether it be on the mic or off the mic, with someone like yourself who understands, I think this culture, science and spirituality were one, weren't they? I think it didn't matter because it was one of my favorite quotes. The fact that it was Carl Sagan. He said the fact that science and spirituality are deemed separate does a disservice to them both because they're not. I think these megalithic sites were places of science and music and learning and spirituality as well. It was all wound together in understanding the earth and the stars and the space and the dark and the light and the good and the bad and the masculine and the feminine. All the echoes are there, aren't they? And I think that's what we're looking at. That's what we're trying to, that's the reason we can wax lyrical because on one hand, we discussed so many different ideas tonight, Charles. On the other hand, we didn't. They're all the same. You know, it's all part. It's all part of the echoes and the evidence of this culture that we both. Look, I would go as I know it existed. I'm not going to say anyone else knows. And when I say I know, that's probably that's my being, my soul saying that. You know.
100% right. I'm seeing the same thing from my analysis of the imperial system. I will release a book this year, but I see that all these arts and sciences were tied together into one. And I'm seeing that these ancient druids they weren't specialized like today's scientists. They might have had specialized people, but to be a proper druid, you had to be a polymath. You had to know all of these sciences
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Yeah.
spiritualisms as well. And
Mm,
they wanted them to learn all of them. The word university, it means everything, universal.
mm. Universal, yeah. And I think it was the Book of Five Rings is up on the shelf there with that's where Confessions of the Gods is up on the shelf there. However, um, Miyamoto Musashi said, if you know the way broadly, you will see it in all things. And I think, that to reinforce that, okay, because I just saw it last night, it's like that old saying, a jack of all trades is a master of none. That's only half of the saying, right? Because, I think the reason that we get along, Charles, is we're similar. We would probably be considered polymaths to a degree, right? We can discuss anti-gravitic propulsion and megalithic stone building in the same conversation and be totally fine with it, right? The actual saying is a jack of all trades is a master of none, however, often better than a master of one. Because if you know the way broadly, you will see it in all things. If you can release the scales and widen your gaze, you'll be able to see it. Now, it comes with a catch, though, doesn't it, Charles? Because once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And it'll send you crazy. But that's, yeah, because once it's seen, it can't be unseen. Do you often wonder that, mate, whether ignorance is bliss? I've often wondered that. I don't think I'd take it, but I've wondered whether it is.
In some ways it is because it helps one to have a more maybe financially rewarding lifestyle than reading books. I tell you what.
Yes, unfortunately, to quote Madonna, we are material girls in a material world. Uh, well, look, in saying that, just to finish, mate, plug your eBay store. What's your store? He's got put it to listen, guys. Trust me when I say, if I didn't already have 15 boxes of books, I would be buying a lot of Charles's books that he finds. Where do the fine people of UTC come and buy a book off you, mate?
So the eBay store, it's something I started in February, and I've actually put a lot of occult books there because I know occult books and I know they're worth a certain amount of money. So I've been
Mm.
picking them up for a buck each, and I'm trying to sell them for a bit more than that. But it's called the Book Safari. There's about a
Yep,
thousand books on there, and the username is Doc Charles. So
Doc
if you
Charles.
can Google that, you might find it. I'm not sure if it'll be on Google yet because it's a fairly recent store, but you can have a look.
Mate, give me the link. Give me the link, and let's chuck it in the show notes. Okay, send me the link when we can, and we'll chuck it in the show notes. Because yeah, as I say, Charles sends me his catches every now and again, and I'm like, oh, I'll have all of those. But I've already got 15 boxes of books that aren't on display, so I need to calm down. Well, mate, uh, yeah, send me that link. Absolute pleasure. Again, we've just continued the discussion. It's not over. We'll pick up again in the near future. I really appreciate you giving us the time again. I look forward to our next discussion and further collaboration, mate.
Thanks very much, Triffin, and it's a pleasure talking to you again, and we'll talk again.
Thanks, mate.